Hi everybody, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a widowed D&D player that uses Dungeons & Dragons as an escape, only for a new player to ask her something nasty. A story about a convention goer's experience with convention D&D tables, and much more. But first, if you like what I do here, liking and even sharing the video would really help the channel out a lot. And I would highly appreciate it. And so would Luna.
Yeah, you really appreciate likes and shares, don't you, Lunas? Such a sweet piece.
She is such a sweet kitty. But with that said, let's get into some D&D horror stories. Creep, not happy that he isn't allowed to prey on a vulnerable player. By Reddit user, Minute Storm. I have had a lot of bad experiences over the decades, but this has to be one of the worst ones because it struck so much more personal than anything else I've experienced before. The group is full of adults, all 30 plus. A friend of my wife, a woman we'll call Carla, a friend of mine who we'll call Lou, and a friend of my friend who was suggested to me because he is a quote, great role player, not a number cruncher, who couldn't really find any group lately. This is the problem guy, who I will call Phil. Finally, a close friend of the family, V. V was the main reason I run this weekly group right now, because she has been through an incredible, terrible period lately. She lost her husband to a sudden cerebral hemorrhage, and is still recovering after her failed suicide attempt recently. We had a lot of concerns about her well-being, and we were making sure she wasn't alone. It's been a long and hard period of trying to get her mood up, even a little bit. But it was working out pretty well with role-playing games, as she seemed to be easily absorbed by them. Unfortunately, Phil's idea of role-playing quickly turned out to be a bit more personal than expected. He quickly flirted, in-game, with the two women, and was quickly told to knock it off. After a little bit of back and forth, he toned it down, but instead stuck to a comedic, unreciprocated love towards Carla, which she thought was funny too. It worked okay for a few sessions, and the mood was actually pretty good. The dynamics seemed to work. That is, until one session 2 weeks ago, where during a short break, Lou asked why the kitchen door was locked. It's an old built-in lock that we don't use ourselves, but it came with the house. Phil had locked V in there, talking to her about, quote, stuff related to the game and such. Now, we are adults, and V acted like usual when they came out, with Phil seeming more pissed than before. So we figured it was Phil coming with a bad suggestion that V shot down, since she didn't seem too bothered, and her, quote, confirming she was fine. We let it go, only making it very clear that the kitchen should not be locked under any circumstances. Then, we got to our last session. Phil was acting more flirty than usual, not just in game either, and making even my wife, who wasn't even part of the game, uncomfortable. Lou tried to excuse his behavior as him, quote, having a bad day, and we got him to calm it, until, during a short break, my wife noticed Phil having locked the door to the kitchen again to, quote, trap V in there. My wife only overheard him asking her why she was so cold towards him, to which V gave a cold, short, "I don't really like you" response before she unlocked and left the kitchen herself, seemingly unfazed. My wife got pretty angry at Phil. The kitchen door can be locked, but it absolutely shouldn't be locked under those circumstances, as was made very clear previously. According to my wife, Phil's excuse was, "V keeps avoiding me, and I wanted to make sure she'd respond properly to some questions I had." My wife didn't like that response, unsurprisingly. She came back to me and made it pretty clear to me that she really wants Phil out of the house. Not having heard it myself, and truly hoping this was a misunderstanding, my wife and I brought it up as we were sitting back down at the table. Quick edit for additional clarification. The intention was to know what had happened, and if they had done more than just talk. My wife, essentially, wanted to know if he should just leave, or if we should call the cops. Instead of coming with any kind of excuse, Phil just got pissy. He turned to V with the most ridiculous sentence I have heard in a long time. "If her husband is dead, and she wants to die anyway, why is it such a big deal to ask if she wants to make another guy happy?" Dude, what the fuck? Lou, being Phil's friend, didn't even say a word, as he just quietly slipped out into our backyard to hide, not even going to pretend to defend Phil. V just instantly packed up her things and left, clearly pushed beyond her level of comfort, with my wife following her out the door. This left me and Clara, and we were crystal clear that Phil leaves right now, and will not be coming back under any circumstances. Phil tried to argue very briefly, but quickly got the hint and packed up and left. I still don't know how Lou didn't know about this, but he seemed just as surprised and baffled at this incredibly insensitive and borderline predatory behavior by Phil. Also, upfront note, yeah, I did not handle this well. That's the main reason this infuriates me. It should have been dealt with much sooner. That was certainly brazen of Phil to try to proposition V like that, but I think that OP is being a little too hard on himself here. The first time Phil and V were in the kitchen, anyone would think that they were just talking about D&D stuff, or stuff about their characters, or something. Especially with how V seemed not to be bothered at all. But then, the second time, I would say it could raise an eyebrow that they were both locked in the kitchen again, and OP's wife picked up on this. I just can't believe that someone could be so cold-hearted to try and proposition someone as vulnerable as V after she went through all the stuff that she did. Then to say that sentence in front of everyone like it was no big deal. That's like psycho behavior. It is a good thing that Phil eventually got the hint that he was no longer welcome, and hopefully OP's wife was able to comfort V, and they could all get back into the game that was proving to be a great distraction for her. Some people, man. I mean, jeez. Let's move on. Rolled good for one session, now I'm nerfed. By Reddit user GoodRaspberry5557. Playing a homebrew game, and my dungeon master let our party do a no-limit point buy. Still a set number of points, but no cap to what to put the stats at. So, you want a +5, you can have it, but you'll have multiple negatives in other stats. On our first session, I rolled stupidly well for the few rolls we did that night. Probably averaged a 17 on my rolls. And although other people also did stat dumps, the Dungeon Master decided that my character needed to be nerfed. I'm playing a rogue with a monster type of race, so he implemented a hunger mechanic. So if I don't feed off of living people every day, I get disadvantage on every check and save that has to do with dex, which goes without saying, as a rogue, makes me completely useless. I eventually had to barter with the Dungeon Master to at least let me keep my stealth a flat roll, so I could sneak away to get rid of the hunger, at the cost of whenever I'm afflicted, he gets to roll an extra damage die whenever I get hit. There's also a system where we are being watched by otherworldly beings, so if we do quote evil acts, like, feeding on people, the beings will punish us for not being the good heroes they want us to be. This system of being punished for not being good was also implemented after our first session, and was never brought up when we were making our characters. So, another player and myself, who made slightly evil-aligned characters, are basically getting bashed because the Dungeon Master suddenly didn't like it, after being very encouraging of our choices when making the characters. I love my character, and I want to continue playing him. But to say the least, I am slightly annoyed. Yeah, I can see why OP would be a bit peeved about all that. Not only is the Dungeon Master adding a mechanic that makes OP's character commit evil-aligned acts in order to properly function as a character, but is then adding another mechanic that punishes the player for committing the evil acts. That is hardly fair, and if I were OP, I would get together with the other player that this, quote, must be good mechanic affects, and talk to the Dungeon Master about how it's making the game not fun for you. Hopefully, the Dungeon Master will realize how unfair the whole thing is, and backtrack on that at least. If not, and OP isn't having fun, I would suggest possibly switching to a character that would fit more within this DM's rules, even though he added them after the second session. Or just look for a game that would better fit OP's character, since it sounds like they put a lot of thought into said character, and really wants to play it. Though, what would you do if you were in OP's shoes here? On to the next post. Metagaming player character makes the game worse for everyone. By Reddit user, JaffroBoy. I decided to run a Tomb of Annihilation campaign. This was the first full campaign I'd run online, so I was pretty inexperienced. Wow, and you started out with Tomb of Annihilation? That's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see how it works out for him. I recruited people from both the Roll20 game advertising and people I knew online. Dog was a guy I'd briefly played with before. He was very keen to play, as he said he started to play in a Tomb of Annihilation campaign before, but had fallen apart. I would soon get an idea as to why. Anyway, he seemed cool when we played before, and assured me his previous knowledge wouldn't be a problem, so I signed him up. The game started off well, had some really cool one-on-one sessions with the players to integrate their backgrounds into why they were joining the expedition. Portney and Zaru is great for scene setting with the whole party, etc. I had a few minor problems with Dog, like him saying he thought the book said that they should get a level up when they left town, etc. But I put that down to him, remembering his old DM running it differently. Eventually, they made it to a dungeon. The party was doing well, slowly advancing, drawing enemies out, not alerting the ones deeper in, etc. Then, Dog decides to charge in, past the current fight, into a crowd of enemies that had not been alerted yet. Those enemies all start aggroing on him, and is his response to retreat? No. He charges even further in, essentially alerting the whole dungeon. Well, his character dies, and the rest of the party is only saved from a TPK because I had some NPCs come help. It was plausible that they would do so, but it did feel like a bit of an arsepool. His response when the rest of the group questioned what the F he was thinking? Well, those enemies come and join in the fight in that room anyway, so it didn't make any difference. If it wasn't obvious, he just made it clear that he had been using meta-knowledge from his previous game to determine his actions. And the kicker is, he wasn't even correct. The book specifically states that those enemies don't aggro unless you hang out close to them for several turns, which he did. He metagamed and used it to make things worse for everyone. Since we were using the optional lingering injuries rule from the Dungeon Master's Guide, some player characters suffered long-term consequences from his actions. Anyway, not wanting to be mean, I allowed his backup character to be found in the dungeon prison cells. But apparently, that wasn't fast enough for him, and while the others were coming to get him out of his own mess, he started doodling all over the Roll20 map that we were trying to play on. Then, once we got back to port, he decides to go off on his own and enter gladiatorial fights, which was already kind of a dick move, as it meant that the other players weren't getting to do much while I'm running his fight. But to make matters worse, Roll20 is not displaying the NPC's rolls publicly, so he starts whining every time they hit him and saying that I've got to tell him the rolls rather than just saying if they hit. Thoroughly sick of his crap at this point, I answer, "No, I don't, actually." And he instantly rage quits. Thank God. I should have kicked him earlier, but I was new, and it's harder in the moment. Anyway, the game was better from then on, though of course it still had problems. It eventually ended bittersweetly with the player characters ending the death curse, but all dying in the process. TLDR. Player uses meta-knowledge that they are incorrect about, hurts the whole party, whines, then rage quits when they don't get their way. So thus, the trash took itself out. I have to admit that I find it a bit comical that Dog, which I am not a fan of the naming convention in the story, blatantly said that he wouldn't use meta-knowledge to OP before joining the game, only to then use incorrect meta-knowledge and putting the whole party at risk because of it. Though, as far as Dog going to the gladiator arena taking up game time away from the other players, OP could have always had one round of the fight go, then cut to the other players, and then cut back to the fight. But like OP said, they were new. At least it sounds like the rest of the players had a good time after Dog left, even though they all ended up dying. But hey, that is Tomb of Annihilation for you. Let's move on to the next post. Dungeon Master wants to sex up everyone. By Reddit user, The Silver One. I've been a forever DM for a long time. Me and the girlfriend wanted to play a game together, so we looked on Facebook to find a local D&D group. We found an early Strahd campaign, decided to excitedly give it a try so I could finally be a player. Walking in, the table was interesting. There was a 15-year-old girl, a 70-something older gent, myself and my partner, and another confused first-timer like myself. Some conversation started, and some anime porn etched into silver dollars got passed around. First red flag. After some rather inappropriate talk with the minor at the table, and some rather confusing onboarding, we get to playing. The first NPC we meet is Strahd's High Chancellor, Vasily. It became quickly apparent this guy is the DMPC, and is following us everywhere. He played him as a sexpest, constantly going from player to player, trying to hit on them. I had refused and let him down gently. Apparently though, after making it to a town, I still woke up nude next to this NPC. I asked the DM if there was any evidence of me being violated, and he said it was all about perspective. Festivities continued, and the DM's daughter wanted to sit in and roleplay a little. He immediately makes an NPC start dancing with her and hitting on his daughter's player character. He tries to get them the bone, but the daughter refused. I made an excuse, and me and my partner bailed. This guy looked like the South Park World of Warcraft guy, and just about pushed every negative stereotype about the game to the forefront of play. I feel gross, and maybe a little traumatized. The Dungeon Master might be soliciting minors for inappropriate things too. My partner heard him talking about hitting on the minor at the table's friends, debating on calling the police. He works at a local school. Well, that certainly sounded like an unpleasant experience. First, with the hentai coins being passed around, in which I just have to ask, why? Then for the Dungeon Master to run a DMPC as a sexpest, to the point of basically forcibly making OP's character wake up next to him when they got to a town. I would say that would have been the point to leave, especially after the Dungeon Master tried to roleplay flirt with a 14-year-old player. Now, at first, when reading this, I thought the man in his 70s was the Dungeon Master, but in the comments, OP clarified that he was a player. But with everything going on in that game, I don't blame OP for making an excuse to get the heck out of there. And as far as calling the police because OP's girlfriend overheard what she did, I mean, you can always make an anonymous tip, and the fact that he works at a school doesn't make that fact any better. As far as D&D though, hopefully, OP and their girlfriend can find another game where OP can be a player, and this time without all the cringy and creepy crap. Let's move on. Adventures at a Convention D&D Table by Reddit user DiceRoller667. Over the weekend, I went to a popular convention, local popular, not like Comic-Con popular, and bought 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, worth of tickets. And on the website, they said something about hosting D&D one-shots and short campaigns, so I took my D&D kit with me. One's a horror, and one's a palate cleanser. Friday. On Friday, I first arrived, and after walking around the con for a few hours, I decided to take a look at the D&D games that were being hosted. As they were, quote, drop in, drop out types of tables, I found a table that was just setting up, introduced myself, and sat down. Cast 1 is as follows. Boogie, the Dungeon Master. You'll see why. Lauren, the Dragonborn Fighter. Me, a Githyanki Arcane Trickster. Ty, the Human Cleric. And Maurice, the Dwarf Bard. So we sat down and we had our small session 0 of, this takes place here. This is what I allow. Go nuts. So I made my Arcane Trickster Gith, and we started playing. We started in a tavern, with Maurice trying, in his words, to rizz up the ladies. Lauren and I chatting about work, and Ty being told about this mysterious amulet that the tavern keeper had around his neck. Boogie. Suddenly, you all hear shouting outside, and big stomping noises. Me. I cast Misty Step to get on top of the rafters and look outside the top window. Boogie. Alfie, my character's name. You see a large demon with horns, jagged teeth, and a big trench hammer. Me. Okay. I call out to the innkeeper on who is approaching, and I cast invisibility on myself. Boogie. Okay, this hulking monstrosity walks in. Roll me a stealth check. Me. 22. I had expertise. Boogie then describes that this demon easily swipes away at Lauren and laughs at Ty, cowering in fear, behind his divine weapon. He then goes to grab the amulet from the innkeeper and pockets it. Me. Oh, I cast Mage Hand. I was excited. Boogie. He cast Counterspell. Me. Wait, wouldn't the demon not know he's there, hence the stealth check? Boogie, after a moment of silence. Sure. Me. I have my hand go to his pocket, and I pickpocket the amulet. Boogie. Sleight of hand. Me. 21. Boogie. Just silence. At this point, Boogie decided to grab the long edge of the table and just start pushing it. The players at our table step back, including me, and he just flips the table on its side. Minis and dice falling down, paper floating to the ground, etc. Boogie. Congratulations, dipshit. You just ruined the game for everyone. Ty. What the hell, dude? Looking at Boogie. While this all went down, I saw employees come our way, and after talking to them, they told us they had it under control. So we all left, excluding Boogie. Saturday. After Friday's fiasco, I went back to the con, and after a few hours of scouring the stalls, I tried my hand again at D&D. Boogie, thank God, wasn't there, but the only table that was open had some older fellows there. So that's where I went, sat down, and introduced myself. Cast 2 is as follows. Greg, Dragonborn Barbarian. Joe, Half-Giant Barbarian. Lyle, Elf Barbarian. Matthew, the DM. Smithy, Orc Barbarian. Riley, Orc Barbarian. Wow, that is a lot of barbarians. And me, a Kobold Rogue, Arcane Trickster. Small preface is that all the fellas here are friends with one another. This was the most funnest game I have ever played. When I introduced my character, Soap, as he gets in and out of places, squeaky clean, I was sitting at the bar in the corner, just how a rogue would always be like in such a tavern. Matthew. All of a sudden, you see 5 large barbarians barge into the tavern and hone in onto your table like a missile. Me. I discreetly grab my knife, ready for trouble. Greg. Does the small one know how to open doors without smashing them? Me. Well, yes, but for a Joe, interrupting me. Say no more. And I yoink Soap out of the chair, lift him high, and walk out chanting. Insert 5 men in their early 50s chanting, Small dragon open door, small dragon open door. For both Saturday and Sunday, this was my table, and I loved it. Well, that first DM certainly seemed to have some rage issues, and I can see why OP decided to name them Boogie. OP was just playing into his character's strengths, and did what he thought was best given the situation. It's not OP's fault that he rolled well, or that Boogie couldn't think on his feet. Seriously, if OP snatching the amulet out of the demon's pocket would destroy the entire one-shot, why not just on the fly say that the demon had true sight and spotted the rogue right away? Or any other number of things that a DM can come up with on the fly. But no, Boogie just decided not to think, act like a child, and presumably get kicked out of the convention. At least it wasn't all doom and gloom for OP though, as that last group he played with sounded like a blast. Though I will admit, it did seem a bit dicey at first with all of them being barbarians. But the image in my head of all of these barbarians carrying this confused kobold chanting about opening a door does bring a smile to my face. And thus, why I think I will end the episode here, on a bit of a high note, especially considering the content in some of the previous stories. So, as always, I appreciate all of you. Remember to thank your good DMs, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.